this webinar so we can post it on the website so that people who aren't able to be here today are able to see it. So you know who we are at Volunteer West Virginia. You've got me today, Holly Carlson. I am the executive director here, and Dana Bryant, our outreach officer. Dana will be managing chat box and waiting room and questions. If you've got questions, feel free to type them in the chat box towards the end, and we will go through them. So today's topic, as you all know, is our volunteer capacity building grants. Today we'll go over the program, the kind of projects we're looking for, some tips on how to write an application, and then all of your questions, we'll get through them at the end. We'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So the goals of Volunteer Generation Fund is to strengthen volunteer programs in West Virginia. So these grants are up to $10,000, and the goal is to develop a capacity building project to create a new volunteer program or to strengthen an existing one. So there's 3 types of projects you want to fund with this funding: either a strategic planning project to implement a new volunteer program, some way of strengthening an existing program. So whether maybe you want to have better volunteer position descriptions or handbooks or recognition programs, something like that. Or if you have a really good volunteer program and you're wanting to do an evaluation and see maybe some smaller areas where you could make it stronger, that would be a great option for this funding as well. So this funding is federal. Volunteer West Virginia is a pass-through entity. So we receive funding from the federal government, and then we pass it through to organizations in West Virginia. So non-federal organizations can apply. Usually it's institutes of higher education, local government, nonprofit organizations, or states, but tribal organizations are eligible for this funding as well. They don't count as a federal entity. It is important to know that for federal funding, you have to have a DUNS number and a SAM registration. So if your organization doesn't have a DUNS number yet, this is required for your letter of intent for this funding. They're free. You just go to this website here and request one, but it can take a little while to get one. So we'd recommend doing it right away. So important dates for this project: letters of intent are due by December 6th. There's an electronic form in our notice of funding opportunity that you click through. It's real short, and you complete it according to the instructions in our notice of funding opportunity. We will review those, and any organizations that submit a letter of intent who are eligible to apply, which means you're an eligible organization and you have a DUNS number, then we will invite those organizations to submit full applications by January 27th. Those applications are a budget and a short narrative in a Word document. And so then we will send all that information to you if you're invited to apply. You also notice in our notice of funding opportunity, the questions that we will ask in that application are there so you can see them, so you can be prepared when you submit your letter of intent for the amount of work that goes into the application later. We will have a community group review the applications and make selections, and then successful applicants will be notified by March 1st. And the project timeline for these capacity building projects is between March 1st and August 31st. So tips for applications: because they are reviewed by a group of community members, they'll want to know what you plan to do with the funding, and the clearer you can make it for them to select your application, the better. So describing a project that really well increased the capacity of organization is really helpful for our reviewers. Using data can be really helpful. If you have data that you can provide to our reviewers, it helps them understand what you're doing, and it gives them a really tangible way to understand it. You want to make sure you have allowable activities. We'll talk about what would not be allowable here in a minute. I always recommend when you write a grant application, having somebody who knows nothing about the project read it. Can be really helpful because they'll look at it and they'll say, hey, this doesn't make any sense, and point out the things that our community reviewers may not understand. The other thing that's really important to note with this funding is it's cost reimbursement. So you have to incur the expenses and then you send us receipts and we'll reimburse you afterwards. So that's not how all grants work, but that's how grants through Volunteer West Virginia work. So some sample activities you might consider with this funding. You could hire a consultant to develop a strategic plan for using volunteers to support your mission. If you have a really great volunteer, board member, someone close to you you'd like to contract with, who could develop materials for your program to strengthen it, such as position descriptions, handbooks, training, reflection, that would be a great use of this funding. If you have software you'd like to purchase to support your volunteers, supplies that could strengthen your volunteer program. If you have staff that you'd like to send to training around volunteerism, that would be a wonderful use of this funding. Memberships to organizations that support volunteer programs and are working with an evaluator to evaluate the success of your volunteer program. And this funding is up to $10,000, so you could do more than one of these things. You're welcome to do a few of these activities to get to that amount of funding and work on a few projects, if that makes sense. This funding is federal, so there's a few things that we won't allow you to spend it on. Any kind of food or alcohol purchase, catering meals, things like that are not allowable. Anything that isn't going to adhere to COVID safety guidelines, and staff time. This funding, because it's capacity building, can't be used to pay for the time of your existing staff unless you're using contractors. So if you're interested in applying for this funding opportunity, we recommend that you download our notice of funding opportunity from our website, volunteer.wv.gov. Review it, make sure it makes sense to you. If you have any questions, you can send them into our question email and we're happy to answer them. Request a DUNS number and submit that letter of intent electronically through our form by December 6th. So that is it for me. I think the letter of intent is pretty straightforward, and then people who are selected to move forward will be in touch with more information. We can do another one of these webinars to answer questions. Dana, do we have questions in the chat to answer?
Hi, Holly. We have a few questions. I'll read them out to you. And if you all have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll read them to Holly. So our first question was from Kathy. She wants to know, how often is reimbursement submitted for the grant?
So we could do it monthly between March and August. So it takes a little bit of time on our end to reimburse the funding. So it may take 6 weeks or so after you've incurred it to get reimbursed.
And then a second question was from Jess Richard. She asked, can the funding be used for supplies volunteers need to perform voluntary duties?
I would think so. You definitely want to explain why that's improving the capacity of your volunteer program, so that our reviewers can select that and understand it. But I would think that would fall under capacity building for sure.
Let's see. Sherry Allen asked, can we use this grant to train volunteers?
Absolutely. That would absolutely increase the capacity of your volunteer program. I think that would be a great use of the funding.
Perfect. And that was our last question. So if you all have any more questions, please put them in the chat and then we'll read them. Just to highlight, we will be sending out a copy of these slides and a link to the recording if you need to revisit it. And then we had a few more questions pop in. Let's see. Chrissy Hall asked, food is an unallowable expense. In the event of recognition event for volunteers that include food, that would not be an eligible cost, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it doesn't mean you couldn't have food at the event, but we wouldn't be able to reimburse you with this funding.
Perfect. And then Holly, you touched on this, but it's kind of the same question, just a little bit different. Would you be able to do paid training of any kind?
Absolutely. I think training would be a really great use of this funding.
Good. I love that we have so many questions. We have a few more. Okay. This is from Dave. He says, to be clear, we can hire a contractor to train volunteers, but not use our own staff to train volunteers.
Yes, unfortunately, for this type of funding, the type of record keeping you have to keep for hours of your staff is really complicated. So that's why it's ineligible for the funding. So yeah, you can use a contractor, but not your own staff.
Let's see. Stacy asked, are volunteer retention programs considered as capacity building?
I would think so, yes. Yeah, some work around volunteer retention would be also a great thing to apply for under this funding.
Is rental of a conference facility for a volunteer training, networking, and recognition event allowed?
Yes. So many great ideas. I think you all have put some thought into what you might like to do. That's wonderful.
Hey, Holly, I think we have a few more questions. When they keep coming, I'm glad you all are so interested. Okay. When you say projects have to be implemented between March 1st and August 31st, that means, for example, that any trainings would have to be done within that time period.
Yes. Yes.
Would volunteers that are being trained be able to get paid for training?
No, and that's a problem because once you start paying volunteers, they're not volunteers anymore and it changes their legal status. So unfortunately, no.
Ramsey Monk has a great question. Are we allowed to use the funds to pay for volunteer trainers, hotel, and travel expenses?
Travel expenses would be allowable, yes.
And then Jess Richards says, can you remind me again of the grant timeframe, as in when can the funds be used?
Yes, so the funds can be used between March and August of 2022.
Could funds be used for food distribution activities?
I might need some more information on that. Possibly. If you could tie that to building the capacity of your program, I think we could consider it. But you may want to send that in with more specifics into the email address so we could answer it a little more thoroughly.
And I'll put that email address in. Oh, the email address is up on the chat screen, you all. So if we don't answer your questions, be sure to email them to that address. Let's see. Can funds be used for volunteer incentives?
Yep, that should be fine.
Would we be allowed to purchase volunteer appreciation gifts as thank yous for attending our training?
Yes.
Could funding be used to teach Could funding be used for a teacher to train volunteers how to conduct traditional arts programming, such as weaving and blacksmithing? We want to expand our outreach into local schools.
That sounds fun. I want to come to that training. Yes, as long as that teacher was a contractor and not a staff person of your organization or acting in the capacity of a contractor, it would be fine.
After submitting the letter of intent, when will eligible organizations be notified of the invitation to apply?
We will get back to you within 10 days. It should be faster than that, but we'll make sure you have got lots of time to do the application.
Dave asked, how competitive is this program? How many grants might you award?
So this is new for us, so I don't know how many applicants will receive. We're hoping to grant about $10,000 application or awards. So that's about the size of it that we're thinking. Because it's new, I don't know how many applications we're likely to receive.
See, Holly, I think you already answered this, but the Rail team is curious to know, can we use the funds to pay for supplies for a volunteer project?
Yes.
Penny Porter asked, are marketing and outreach expenses allowable? Print, radio, etc.
Yes.
And then Rebecca asked, could funding be used to purchase contest prizes among volunteers?
I would think so. Yeah, definitely. That's another one you'd want to make sure you explained it well in your application, but I think it would be a possible expense.
Perfect. That was our last question, so we'll give you all one more second. I love all these questions. And Holly, you were able to say yes to most of them, so.
That's good. Yeah. And if you think of more things as you start looking at it more and getting into the process, I mean, feel free to email them to us. And Dana has been helping me respond really quickly to emails. So we're really happy to chat through ideas with you. This is a new project for us too. So we're so excited to offer it and to hear what your ideas are and kind of help you come up with something great.
Holly, Ramsey asked, can we get a list of the questions and the answers sent to us?
Yes. Yep, we'll pull them out of the chat box and do it. Yes.
If Charles asked, if we create a volunteer program for residents at the West Virginia Veterans Home, could a resident be contracted and paid using this grant?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think that might work well. Yeah.
Are training supplies covered in this grant?
Yes.
Arthur Dale Heritage says, thank you for conducting this webinar.
Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you coming and asking great questions.
Let's see. Melanie asked, after submitting the letter of intent, will eligible organizations be notified of, when will the eligible organizations be notified of the invitation to apply?
We'll send it out to you within 10 days to the contact person that you've put in the form, the letter of intent form.
Will the review committee provide feedback on proposals that are not approved?
So we will try to do that depending on volume of applications. We'll do our best to provide some feedback.
And then Jess Richards said, hearing all these ideas, I'm excited about volunteerism in the state in 2022.
We're excited too. I'm really excited that we're able to get this funding and get it out. And I'm really excited to see what you all do with it.
Let's see, anyone have any last questions for us today? One more second.
I got on late. Is this going to be recorded? Can I watch it, please?
Hi,
Yes.
John David.
Hi.
We will be sending out a recording and a copy of these slides to you all.
And you're going to send that out because I apologize for being late.
Oh yeah, we'll send it to you, no worries.
Yep, it will go to the email that people registered with for the webinar today. We'll send out the slides and the recording to that email.
That's super great. We do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
I have a question. Hi,
Paula, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, guys. A lot of times the numbers of people you serve make people are more inclined to pick people who serve greater numbers, but yet a capacity building grant helps you serve better numbers. So will it strictly be about how many people you're serving, or will it take in consideration how many you could serve if you have those elements that you're asking help for taken care of?
Yeah, we're not going to be interested in how many people you're serving with the grant. The questions aren't geared that way at all. We really want you, you may not serve really anyone. If you're developing a new project, it may be really that all you're doing is creating something new inside of your organization. So that's not the focus of this at all. Yeah, it's just, we really want you to be able to strengthen your organization or your program.
Thank you.
Let's see, I think you just answered that with Paula's question, but Melanie was asking, will the application be weighed on the number of people reached?
No, that's not a criteria for this.
And then Ramsey said, just for clarification, we can't use the funds to purchase food for volunteers during an event.
Yes, sorry. The federal funding doesn't like it very much when you purchase food.
Any idea of what the grant reporting process will look like, such as frequency of reporting?
So you'll have to submit financial requests to us. So it'll have a little form that you'll fill out with receipts that tell us what you've purchased. Those will have you submit probably monthly. And then the end will just be there'll be a pre-post test that you'll do of your capacity that will be short, about 10 questions. And we'd love for you also to send pictures and a little story in about it, but hopefully nothing too crazy. The biggest part is the financial reporting because it's cost reimbursement. You have to send us all your receipts so that we can pay you back.
Let's see, Rebecca, could funding pay for volunteer housing?
Possibly. I think you'd have to maybe get a little more specific with that one and send it into the email, and we'll think about it a little bit more.
Will we receive a confirmation that the letter of intent has been received?
Oh, it doesn't send you. I don't think the form sends you that. I suppose we could probably do it from there. It should tell you once you submit it, it will show you that it was submitted on your screen. So you want to make sure you get to the screen that says form submitted, but it's not like you get an email or something saying that you've submitted it. It just shows up on your computer screen.
This is like a Survey Monkey, Holly.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're in doubt, you could do it a second time. And then worst case scenario, we have 2 letters of intent from you, but I don't think it should be a problem.
Rebecca asked if AmeriCorps volunteers were brought in, I'm thinking an NCCC team, could these funds house them while they are in?
I will have to look into that for you. I'm not sure if there would be a prohibition on using the same type of federal funding like this. That one I have to look into for you. Do you mind sending it into the email for me? And we'll get a good answer for you.
I'll put that in the, because Rebecca, this funding comes from the same organization that the AmeriCorps funding comes from, right, Holly? So
yeah, I don't feel confident in my answer for that one. So I will research that one for you.
Melanie says, are you looking for capacity building in partnerships?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's great if you want to do this as a partnership or as a couple organizations. I think that's a wonderful idea if that makes sense for you.
And then Beth Reese asked, do you have resources for us to employ a trainer for workshops and volunteer management?
So we could certainly help connect you with people if you have questions about that. Send that into the email address too, and we can helps you with finding those people. Probably once you're past the letter of intent stage, if that's something you need help with when developing your application, we'd be happy to try and point you in the direction of some people. But I also don't want you to feel like you would have to use somebody we recommend. I mean, whoever you know, local people in your community are great as well.
See, Beth said she's in Hampshire County and they don't know anyone at this point. And then you're welcome, Jess. I'm glad you liked the webinar. So any last call for questions? If anyone has any final burning questions, pop them in the chat box for us. They're slowing down, so I think we might have answered them all. Holly, Teresa asked, is Volunteer West Virginia able to help with training of volunteers?
So possibly, I mean, I would say we provide some training similar to this throughout the year, like our grant writing training. So there may be some things like that would work. that might be another one, once we get into the application process, to send us a really specific question into the email address, and we might be able to give you a better answer.
All right, Holly, I think we got them all.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited about this new funding opportunity. Please don't hesitate to send in questions to the email address if you have them. We'll answer them, and we will get out the recording of this webinar and these slides for you by the end of the week. Have a really wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John David.